My name is Avery Collins. I'm 31 years old. And the first time I understood how dangerous love can be when it turns dishonest, nothing shattered. There was no screaming, no dramatic confrontation, no wine glass slipping from my hand and exploding across the kitchen tile like in movies, where betrayal always announces itself with perfect timing and expensive sound design. What I remember instead is the hum of the refrigerator, the ache behind my eyes, the soft click of my front door closing behind me 3 hours earlier than it should have, and a man's voice from the bedroom saying my name in a tone so casually dismissive it made the entire apartment feel unfamiliar. If you had asked me a month before that day whether I trusted my boyfriend, I would have said yes fast enough to embarrass myself now. Not because I was naive in the cartoonish kind of way. I wasn't some starry-eyed girl inventing a future out of crumbs and chemistry. I was practical, organized, careful with money, careful with people. The kind of woman who read contracts before signing them and checked restaurant bills even on date night. But love has a strange way of slipping past the security measures you build for the rest of your life, especially when the person asking for your trust sounds wounded enough, especially when he knows exactly how to make dependence look like devotion. His name was Ethan Mercer. At the time, we had been together a little over 2 years and living together for 11 months in a one-bedroom apartment with pale gray walls, bad overhead lighting, and a tiny balcony neither of us used except to pretend we were the kind of people who liked fresh air with our coffee. We had routines. That was the thing that made it all feel real. He left cabinet doors open. I closed them behind him. I loaded the dishwasher in neat rows. He stacked mugs in there like he was being chased. He liked sleeping with the television on low. I hated it, but eventually got used to drifting off to the sound of late-night reruns and sports commentary. He called me Ave when he wanted something and baby when he wanted forgiveness. I should have noticed sooner that there was a difference. Ethan was studying for a licensing exam that was supposed to change everything. That was the phrase he liked to use. Change everything. He had said it so often I could hear the exact rhythm of it in my head even when he wasn't around. Once I pass this, everything changes. Once I'm certified, everything changes. Just a few more months, Avery, then everything changes. He had been working part-time and inconsistently, picking up freelance contract jobs that somehow never seemed to cover much of anything for very long. I paid the bulk of the rent, most of the groceries, utilities, internet, insurance for the car he drove more often than I did, a review course, testing fees, a handful of temporary emergencies that began sounding permanent around the 7th month. I told myself it was support. I told myself this was what partnership looked like when one person was in a difficult season. I told myself love was sometimes uneven before it became balanced again. And to be fair, Ethan knew how to make that story feel noble. He knew when to touch the small of my back while I cooked, when to look exhausted enough that I would stop asking questions, when to kiss my forehead and call me his piece like I was something sacred rather than useful. The worst lies are rarely ridiculous. They're flattering. That Thursday started badly in ordinary ways. A canceled afternoon meeting. A headache pulsing behind my left eye. A spreadsheet I had been staring at so long, the numbers started looking personal. By 1:30, I gave up pretending I was going to power through it and drove home early with the only goal being silence, painkillers, and maybe 2 hours unconscious under a blanket. I remember feeling relieved while climbing the stairs to our apartment. Relief is humiliating in hindsight. I unlocked the door quietly because Ethan had told me he'd be home studying all afternoon, and I didn't want to interrupt if he had finally found the focus he'd been claiming was impossible with all the pressure lately. The apartment was dim, curtains half drawn, no music, no television. I set my bag down gently by the entry table, and then I heard him. Not panicked, not emotional, laughing, low, intimate, amused. The bedroom door was mostly closed, but not latched. Just enough of an opening for sound to slide through. At first, I wasn't alarmed. People laugh on the phone. Boyfriends have conversations. Life is full of harmless explanations right up until the second it isn't. Then I heard him say, "She's still handling the payment, relax." I stopped moving. The headache vanished so suddenly it was like my body had cleared the room for something worse. There was a woman's voice on the other end, too faint for words, but I could hear its shape. Familiarity. Comfort. The kind of tone people use when they're already standing on the same side of something. Ethan exhaled a soft laugh. "I know," he said. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Silence. Then, "Vanessa, I'm not going to blow this before the deadline." Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend, the one he had described as a closed chapter. The one who was supposedly ancient history, The one he once called exhausting with such convincing irritation that I'd actually felt sorry he had ever dated her. My hand tightened around nothing. I didn't breathe. Inside the bedroom, his voice dropped lower, but not low enough. She trusts me. That's the whole point. The sentence entered me like ice water. There are moments when your body understands danger before your mind is willing to translate it. My skin went cold first, then my stomach. Then every memory I had of the last 6 months came rushing backward in a new language. The exam fees, the pressure, the sweet apologies, the nervousness every time a due date got close, the sudden affection whenever money became part of the conversation. I stayed exactly where I was, just beyond the doorway, as still as a woman hiding from a storm she could already hear tearing up the roof. He said, "I'm not living like this forever." Another pause. Then a quieter voice, harder now, truer. She was the safest option when everything fell apart. That doesn't mean she's the final one. My face went numb. People talk about heartbreak like a crack, a break, a violent split. For me, it felt more like a lock turning. Something inside me closed and became very calm. Vanessa must have said something that made him laugh again, because I heard that sound next, sharp and ugly and private. "No, she has no idea," he said. "Avery thinks stress makes me distant. She keeps making excuses for me." He paused. Then, once that payment clears, I can breathe again. After that, I'm done pretending this is a future. I don't know how long I stood there. 10 seconds. A minute. Maybe longer. Time gets slippery when the life you thought you were standing in starts peeling away from the walls. There should have been tears. There should have been rage. There should have been something loud enough to match what was happening in my chest. Instead, all I could think was, "Don't let him know you know." It came to me with eerie clarity. Not because I was plotting some grand revenge. Not yet. Because instinct told me that whatever truth I had just uncovered was bigger than the few sentences I'd heard, and if I burst into that bedroom crying and furious, he would do what men like Ethan do best. He would rearrange the scene. He would call me paranoid. He would say I heard fragments. He would soften his eyes and lower his voice and make me work for the truth, like it was a privilege I had to earn. No, not this time. I backed away from the bedroom door as carefully as if the floorboards were wired to an alarm. I picked up my bag. I stepped back into the hallway, and I left my own apartment without making a sound. I sat in my car for 43 minutes. I know the exact number because I watched the clock on the dashboard like it was anchoring me to something objective, something measurable, something that couldn't be manipulated into meaning its opposite. 2 women walked past with grocery bags and didn't look at me. A little boy on a scooter almost crashed into a parked Honda and laughed like it was the best part of his day. Someone on the 3rd floor was frying onions, and the smell drifted through the parking lot in warm, stupid waves, while my entire life was being quietly rewritten. I thought about every sacrifice I had made in the name of us. The weekend trip I canceled because he said the exam prep course was more important. The bonus from work that went straight to his expenses because he swore it was temporary. The way I had defended him to my sister Lila when she asked, too casually to be casual, whether Ethan always needed rescuing, or if that was just the version of him I happened to know. I had been offended for him then. Now all I could hear was her voice in my head saying, "Some people don't need help, Avery. They need access." At a little after 5, I went back upstairs. I took 2 steadying breaths outside the apartment door, arranged my face into something neutral, and walked inside. Ethan was in the kitchen, cooking. Of course he was. There he stood in a dark t-shirt and gray sweatpants, stirring something in a skillet with one hand, while scrolling on his phone with the other, as relaxed as a man who had not just gutted the future in the next room. When he heard me, he looked up and smiled. That smile, that easy, practiced warmth that now looked less like affection and more like product design. "Hey," he said, "you're home early." Meeting got canceled. He set his phone down. "Headache?" I nearly laughed. He knew my face well enough to identify pain on sight. He just didn't care if he caused a different kind. "Yeah," I said. "It's been one of those days. Come here." He opened an arm toward me, and I went. That was the part that still bothers me if I think about it too long. The fact that I walked right into the performance, that I let him kiss my temple, that I breathed in the familiar scent of laundry detergent and cologne and skin and felt grief rise in me, not because I still trusted him, but because some terrible part of me already missed the version of him that had never existed. "You okay?" he asked. "Just tired." He brushed a thumb over my cheek. "I'm making pasta, comfort food." How thoughtful. How efficient. How perfectly timed. "Smells good," I said. At dinner, he was almost absurdly attentive. He asked about work. He refilled my water without being asked. He touched my knee under the table twice. Once, while talking about some ridiculous post online, he smiled and said, "When all this exam stuff is behind us, I swear I'm going to make it up to you. You've carried so much." I looked at him across candlelight I hadn't noticed him lighting. And for one wild second, I wondered if he could hear his own dishonesty, if lies sounded different inside the body that made them. "It's okay," I said. "We're a team." His gaze softened with visible relief. The team line worked on him, I could tell. It reassured him that I was still in place, still useful, still exactly where he'd left me. After dinner, we sat on the couch. He pulled me against him while some forgettable crime show flickered across the television. He played with my hair. He kissed the top of my head once. I stayed still and let the revulsion settle into something colder and more useful than pain. By the time he went to shower, I already understood one thing with absolute certainty. I was not going to confront him until I knew everything I needed to know. Not because I wanted drama, because I wanted the truth in a form he could not blur. That night, while he slept beside me with one hand slung carelessly across my waist like possession and intimacy were the same thing, I stared at the ceiling and rebuilt the last year of my life from scratch. Every overdue payment, every delayed plan, every affectionate apology attached to a financial request. Every time Vanessa's name had come up just long enough for him to dismiss her. Around 2 a.m, Ethan rolled over and murmured, half asleep, "Love you." The words landed between us like an insult. I turned my head and looked at the man in the dark beside me. And somewhere under the hurt, under the humiliation, under the sickening knowledge of how cleanly I had been used, something sharpened. Not vengeance. Not yet. Discernment. The kind that arrives too late to save your innocence, but just in time to save your dignity. By sunrise, I had a plan so simple it almost frightened me. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to observe. I was going to smile. And I was going to wait long enough to find out exactly how much of our life had been real, and exactly what Ethan Mercer thought he was about to get from me before he walked away. Because if a person is arrogant enough, betrayal makes them sloppy. And sloppy people leave evidence. The next morning, I woke up before Ethan. That alone was unusual. He was the one who liked to pretend he had discipline, early alarms, long stretches of focused study, coffee brewed like it was part of a ritual that meant something about his future. But that Friday, I was already awake, lying still beside him, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest like I was studying a stranger. There is something unsettling about seeing someone clearly after you've spent months, years, seeing them the way they wanted to be seen. His face, relaxed in sleep, looked softer, younger, almost harmless. And that, more than anything, made my stomach twist. Because I knew now that harmless had been an illusion he curated carefully. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him, and went into the kitchen. The apartment looked exactly the same. That was the strange part. The same mugs in the sink, the same unopened mail on the counter, the same faint scratch on the cabinet door that we'd both said we'd fix and never did. Nothing in the physical space reflected the fact that something fundamental had shifted. But I had. I made coffee, sat at the small kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started documenting everything. Time, date, what I heard, the exact phrasing I could remember. She trusts me, that's the whole point. Once that payment clears, I'm done pretending this is a future. I wrote it down word for word, not because I planned to use it yet, but because I needed to see it outside my own head, to confirm it had actually happened, to prevent him from ever rewriting it later. By the time Ethan came into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, I had already closed the document and arranged my face into something neutral. "Morning," he said, leaning down to kiss the top of my head. I let him. "Morning. You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." He poured himself coffee, glancing at me with that familiar mixture of concern and calculation. "You still not feeling great?" "I'm fine. A beat." "You sure?" I looked up at him and smiled, just enough. I said I'm fine. Something in my tone must have registered differently, because he hesitated for half a second before nodding. "Okay, just don't push yourself today." "I won't." The lie came easily. That was new. Over the next few days, I began to notice things I had never noticed before. Or maybe I had. Maybe I just hadn't labeled them correctly. Ethan checked in more often than usual. Not in a controlling way. In a monitoring way. "Did you get that payment reminder email? You remember the deadline, right? Hey, can you send me a screenshot after you submit it? Just so I can confirm everything processed okay." He framed everything as anxiety, as stress, as him being overwhelmed. But now I could see the pattern underneath. He wasn't worried about the payment going through. He was worried about whether I was still going to make it. The difference is subtle, until it isn't. I played my role perfectly. I nodded. I reassured. I even teased him once about how paranoid he was getting. You're acting like if it's not submitted 3 days early, the system is going to collapse. He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. I just don't want any issues. You won't have any, I said. And for a second, our eyes met. And I wondered, did he hear it? The double meaning? Probably not. People like Ethan only hear what keeps them comfortable. Saturday, we had dinner with his parents. That was the first real test. Because if there's one place where lies either tighten or loosen, it's around family. His mother, Carol, greeted me like she always did. Warm, slightly overwhelming, already talking before the door was fully open. Avery, you look tired, sweetheart. Are you working too hard again? I smiled. Always. She laughed like that was charming. His father gave me a nod from the living room. Dinner was loud. Comfortable. Normal. That word again. Normal. His mom talked about plans. Future things. Trips. Holidays. She turned to Ethan at one point and said, So, once everything settles with your exam, what's next for you two? Ethan didn't hesitate. Stability, he said, glancing at me with a soft smile. Finally. I almost admired how easily it came to him. Yeah, I added. That sounds nice. Under the table, his hand found mine. Squeezed. Reassuring. Possessive. I squeezed back, because I needed him to believe nothing had changed. Later, his dad pulled me aside near the hallway. Hey, he said quietly, I just want to say, I see what you're doing for him. I kept my expression steady. What do you mean? All the support. The patience. Not everyone would step up like that. There was no accusation in his voice, just quiet approval. And something else. Something like awareness. I wondered briefly how much he actually knew about his son. He's worth it, I said. The words tasted strange. His dad studied my face for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. Well, just make sure he knows that too. I smiled. Oh, he will. By the time we got home that night, Ethan was in a good mood. Relaxed. Confident. He pulled me into a hug in the kitchen, pressing his face into my hair. Thank you, he murmured. For what? For everything. I let him hold me. And I didn't respond, because now I understood something I hadn't before. Gratitude can be part of manipulation, especially when it keeps the other person giving. The week leading up to the deadline felt like living inside a countdown only I could hear. Every day, Ethan grew slightly more attentive, more affectionate, more careful. He brought me coffee in the mornings, texted me throughout the day, cooked dinner twice, which in our relationship qualified as a grand gesture. Love you, he said more often. Always when the conversation drifted anywhere near finances. Always when he needed reassurance. Always at just the right moment. And every time I responded. Because the performance mattered. Thursday night, one day before the deadline, he was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, pretending to study. I was on the couch, scrolling through my phone. He looked up. Hey, he said casually, did you submit the payment yet? Not yet. His fingers stilled on the keyboard. Oh, you're doing it tomorrow? Yeah, deadline's tomorrow night. He nodded. Too quickly. Right, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it'd be safer to do it tonight. I looked at him, tilted my head slightly. Why? He shrugged. Processing delays, system issues, you know how these things can be. I held his gaze for a second longer than comfortable, then smiled. I've got it under control. He forced a small laugh. Yeah, of course you do. A pause. Then, softer. I just worry, you know. I stood up, walked over, and placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't need to worry about this, I said gently. I'll take care of it. He exhaled, relieved. Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm just stressed. I know. I leaned down and kissed his cheek. And as I did, I felt something settle inside me. Final. Cold. Certain. Because in that moment, I knew exactly how this was going to end. Not with a fight. Not with tears. But with timing. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The apartment was quiet. Ethan was still asleep. I got dressed slowly. Carefully. Like I was preparing for something important. Because I was. I walked back into the bedroom and looked at him one last time. Really looked. At the man I had built a future around. At the person who had calculated exactly how long to stay. At the version of him that no longer existed for me. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. A familiar gesture. One he wouldn't question. Love you, he murmured, half asleep. I smiled faintly. You too. Another lie. I left the apartment. Got into my car. And instead of driving to work, I drove somewhere quiet. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere that didn't belong to either of us. And I sat there, waiting. Because by the end of the day, one of us was going to lose the future we thought we had secured. And this time, it wasn't going to be me. I stayed in that coffee shop for almost 5 hours. Not because I needed the time, because I needed the stillness. There's a difference between making a decision and living inside it long enough to know you won't back out. I had already chosen what I was going to do the moment I walked out of that apartment 3 weeks earlier. Today was just execution. Around noon, my phone lit up. Ethan, did you submit it yet? I stared at the message for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen. Then I typed back. I'll handle it later. Don't stress. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Disappeared. Then, okay, just let me know when it's done. I smiled slightly. He was trying to sound calm. He wasn't. I could feel the tension even through text, the careful restraint, the way he didn't want to push too hard and risk making me suspicious. It would have worked. A month ago, I would have reassured him immediately, maybe even sent the payment early just to ease his mind. That version of me was gone. By 3 o'clock, I drove back to the apartment. Fridays, Ethan had a study group that ran until 5. Another detail I had memorized, without realizing how useful it would become. The apartment was empty when I walked in. Quiet. Neutral. Like a stage before the actor's return. I stood there for a moment and, just inside the doorway, taking it all in. The couch. The kitchen. The framed photo of us on the shelf, taken at some overpriced rooftop bar, both of us smiling like we believed in something that had already started to decay. I walked over and turned the frame face down. Not dramatically, just done. Then I went into the bedroom and packed. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, documents, anything that mattered, anything that was mine. It took less than 30 minutes. That's the thing about leaving. When you're sure, it's efficient. I carried everything out to my car, loaded it into the trunk, then went back upstairs one last time. I didn't sit. I didn't hesitate. I stood in the middle of the living room and waited. At 5:42 p.m., I heard his key in the lock. Right on time. The door opened, and Ethan walked in, dropping his bag by the couch like he always did. He looked up, surprised. Avery, you're home early. I told you I might leave work early today. Right, yeah. He smiled, relaxed, relieved. How was your day? Productive. Same, he said, kicking off his shoes. Study group went really well. I think I'm finally getting... He stopped. Something in my expression must have shifted. Not enough to alarm him. Just enough to slow him down. What? He asked. I gestured toward the couch. Sit. He hesitated, then laughed lightly. What's going on? Just sit, Ethan. The tone did it. He sat. I stayed standing for a moment, then took the armchair across from him. We faced each other like strangers negotiating something neither of us wanted to name yet. A beat passed. Then he said it. Did you submit the payment? There it was. The only thing that actually mattered to him. Not yet. His smile flickered. Okay, well, the deadline's tonight. I know. Another pause. So, can you do it now? His voice was careful, measured, trying not to sound urgent. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands in my lap. Before I do anything, I said, we need to talk. The color drained from his face. About what? I held his gaze. Steady, unblinking. About Vanessa. Silence. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Recognition. Immediate. Sharp. Dangerous. What about her? He asked. Too fast. Too controlled. I tilted my head slightly. That's interesting. What is? You didn't ask how I knew you were talking to her. His mouth opened, closed. For a split second, I saw it. The crack. The moment where his mind started racing, trying to rearrange reality fast enough to get ahead of me. It's not, he started. I came home early 3 weeks ago, I said calmly. Thursday, around 2. He froze. Completely. I heard everything. The words landed quietly, but they hit like something heavy. He leaned back slightly, like distance might help him think. That's not... You said I was the safest option. His jaw tightened. You said you were staying until the payment cleared. Avery, you said I had no idea. His hands came up, palms open. Okay, listen. And you were right, I added softly. I didn't... Silence. Thick. Unavoidable. This was the moment. The one where he chose which version of himself he was going to be. The liar, or the man caught telling the truth. He went with both. You misunderstood, he said. Of course he did. I almost smiled. I didn't misunderstand anything. That conversation was taken out of context. Then give me the context. He ran a hand through his hair. Exhaled. It was a joke. I let the silence stretch. A full second. 2, 3. A joke, I repeated. Yeah. Vanessa and I, we have a weird sense of humor. We say things like that sometimes. It doesn't mean anything. I nodded slowly. Okay. Relief flickered across his face. Too early. Then explain the part where you said you were done pretending this was a future. His expression tightened again. That's not... Or the part where you called me the safest option. Avery, you're twisting... No, I said gently. I'm quoting. His voice sharpened. You were eavesdropping in my own apartment? There it was. The pivot. Blame. Deflection. I tilted my head again, studying him. Our apartment, I corrected. The one I pay for. That hit. He flinched. Just slightly. You don't get to throw that in my face. I'm not throwing anything, I'm clarifying. He stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. Is it? Yes, it is. You're taking one conversation, one moment, and blowing it up into something it's not. Then what is it? I was stressed, he snapped. I was venting. I said things I didn't mean. To your ex-girlfriend. That doesn't matter. It matters to me. He paced once, then turned back to me. I love you. The words hung in the air. Familiar. Well-timed. Strategic. I felt nothing. You love what I provide, I said. His expression shifted, hurt, then anger. That's not fair, isn't it? No, it's not. I've been working my ass off. Waiting for me to fund the last step, I cut in. That's not what this is. Then what is it, Ethan? He didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer that didn't confirm what I already knew. The silence said enough. I stood up, slowly. We're done. The words were simple, clean, final. He stared at me. What? I'm not paying anything. His face changed instantly. Not heartbreak. Not loss. Panic. Real unfiltered panic. Avery, wait. You need to move out. You can't be serious. I am. The deadline is tonight. I know. If that payment doesn't go through, it won't. His breath hitched. You're ruining everything. I almost laughed. No, I said quietly. You already did that. He stepped toward me, desperation rising fast now. Please, he said. We can fix this. No, we can't. Yes, we can. We'll go to counseling. We'll talk it out. I'll cut Vanessa off completely, I swear. You should have done that before. I didn't mean any of it. You meant enough. His voice cracked slightly. I need this, Avery. There it was. Not I need you. I need this. The difference mattered. I picked up my bag. I needed honesty. He reached for my arm. I'll do anything. I pulled away. You already did everything. His hands shook. Avery, please. Just submit the payment. We can figure the rest out after. I looked at him one last time. Really looked. At the man who had calculated exactly how long to stay. At the person who had mistaken my trust for strategy. And I felt it again. That cold, steady clarity. No, I said. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed exactly where it was supposed to. I walked past him. Out the door. Down the stairs. Into my car. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name. Once. Twice. Louder the third time. I didn't turn around. By 11:59 p.m., the payment deadline passed. And with it, so did his plan. The first message came before I even reached the end of the street. Avery, pick up. Then another. Please don't do this. By the time I hit the main road, my phone was vibrating nonstop in the passenger seat. Calls. Texts. Voicemails stacking faster than I could read them. I didn't touch it. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I already knew what they said. Panic doesn't create new language. It just rearranges desperation. I drove straight to my sister Lila's apartment across town. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she had been expecting something. If not this, then something close enough to it. One look at my face, and her expression shifted. What happened? Can I stay here for a few days? She stepped aside immediately. Of course, come in. I walked past her, set my bag down, and for the first time all day, I felt it. Not doubt, not regret, just the weight of it finally settling into my body. Lila closed the door behind me. Talk to me. I leaned against the kitchen counter and exhaled slowly. I left Ethan. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Okay, that doesn't sound like a small decision. It wasn't. What did he do? I looked at her, and for a second I almost softened it, almost made it cleaner, less humiliating. But Lila had always been the one person I couldn't lie to. Not because she would catch it, but because she would hear the parts I tried to hide. So I told her everything. The phone call. Vanessa. The plan. The timing. The payment. The confrontation. She didn't interrupt once. Just listened. Arms folded. Eyes sharp. By the time I finished, she let out a low breath. Wow. Yeah. That's not even subtle. No. She shook her head slowly. And he thought you wouldn't find out? I think he thought he didn't need to worry about it. That's worse. I nodded. It is. She walked to the fridge, grabbed 2 bottles of water, and handed me one. So what now? I don't know yet. That's okay. I twisted the cap open. I didn't pay it. She smiled faintly. Good. I looked at her. You don't think that was too much? Lila raised an eyebrow. He was literally planning to leave you right after. I know, but nothing, she cut in. You didn't ruin his life. You stopped funding his exit. The simplicity of it hit me harder than anything else that day. Stopped funding his exit. That's exactly what it was. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, finally letting my shoulders drop. Across the room, my phone buzzed again. And again. And again. Lila glanced at it. You gonna check that? Not yet. Fair. I left it face down on the counter. But about an hour later, curiosity won. Not to respond. Just to see. I picked it up and unlocked the screen. 83 messages, 27 missed calls, most from Ethan. Some from a number I didn't recognize, a few from his mother. I opened the first one. Please answer, I'm serious. Next. Avery, I'm sorry, I didn't mean any of that. I was just stressed. Next. You're overreacting, we can fix this. The shift had already started. Apology. Minimization. Control. I scrolled further. You're going to ruin my career if you don't do this. Then, do you understand what you're doing to me? Then, answer your phone. This is insane. And finally, if you cared about me at all, you wouldn't do this. I let out a quiet breath and locked the screen again. Lila watched me. Well, he's cycling. Of course he is. I set the phone back down. I blocked him. Good. And his mom. Also good. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The next morning, the messages came from new numbers. Unknown contacts. Short, sharp bursts of accusation. How could you do this to him? He needed that payment. You made a commitment. Commitment. That word again. Funny how people only remember it when it benefits them. By Sunday, I went back to the apartment. Not because I missed it, because I needed closure. Lila insisted on coming with me. I'm not letting you walk into that alone, she said, grabbing her keys. When we opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Different from before. Heavier. Final. Ethan was gone. Most of his things were gone too. Clothes. Shoes. His laptop. The small clutter that used to fill the space around him. But not everything. Some drawers were half empty. A few items still scattered like he had packed in a hurry. Or like he had taken what mattered most and left the rest without thinking. Lila stepped inside, scanning the room. Wow, he really moved fast. Yeah. I walked into the living room. Stopped. Something was missing. Not obvious at first, but wrong. I turned toward the TV stand. Empty space. My PlayStation. Gone. I moved to the hallway shelf. The small wooden box I kept there, open. My grandfather's watch. Gone. A cold, familiar feeling settled in my chest. Of course. Of course he did. Lila followed my gaze. What's missing? I listed it out. Her expression darkened. You're kidding. No. That's theft. Yeah. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every empty space. Every open drawer. Every detail. Document everything, Lila said. I am. My voice was steady, almost detached. Because at this point, nothing about Ethan surprised me anymore. Not the manipulation. Not the panic. Not even this. If anything, it just confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't just been planning to leave. He had been planning to take what he could on the way out. I straightened up and looked around the apartment one last time. The place we had called ours. The space I had funded. The life I had believed in. It felt smaller now. Simpler. Like a set after the actors leave and the lights come on. Let's go, I said. Lila nodded. As we stepped out into the hallway, I didn't look back. Because there was nothing left in there that belonged to me anymore. Except the lesson. By Monday morning, I had a folder. Not a messy collection of screenshots and half-remembered details. A system. Photos. Dates. Missing items. Message logs. Call records. A written timeline of everything that had happened from the moment I overheard that call to the moment I stood in an emptied apartment staring at spaces where my belongings used to be. If there's one thing betrayal does, if you let it, it teaches you precision. Lila watched me from across the kitchen table as I worked. You look like you're building a case. I am? Good. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. This was about clarity and boundaries and making sure that whatever came next, no one could twist this story into something it wasn't. Around 10:30, I went to the local police station. The officer behind the desk was polite, but his expression shifted slightly as I explained the situation. So, you live together, he said. Yes. And he had access to the apartment. Yes. He nodded slowly. Okay, that makes things complicated. I figured. I showed him the photos. Listed the items. The PlayStation. The headphones. The watch. Estimated value. He took notes. Listened. Didn't dismiss me, but didn't promise much either. These situations can fall into a gray area, he said. When two people share a residence, it's harder to prove intent. It can be argued as a property dispute rather than theft. So what are my options? You can file a report, which you've done. Beyond that, small claims court is usually the most effective route for recovery. I nodded. I'll do that. He handed me a copy of the report. Document everything. Keep communication records. If he tries to sell anything, that helps your case. I will. As I walked out of the station, I didn't feel frustrated, just focused. That was the strange part. The emotional chaos had already burned through. What was left was clean. That afternoon, I filed the paperwork. Fee paid. Court date set. 6 weeks out. When I got back to Lila's, my phone was lighting up again. New numbers. New messages. I didn't open them. Instead, I scrolled to one contact I hadn't blocked yet. Ethan. I created a temporary number. Typed one message. Attached the photos. Then sent. You have 24 hours to return my property. After that, I proceed legally. The reply came in less than a minute. Are you serious right now? I didn't answer. Another message. You're really going to do this after everything? Then, I needed that stuff. I stared at the screen. A short, humorless laugh escaped me. Needed. Of course, everything with him was need. Never accountability. Never responsibility. Just need. I locked my phone and set it aside. That him? Lila asked. Yeah. And? He says he needed my stuff. She blinked. Your stuff? Yeah. She shook her head slowly. Wow, he's consistent. I'll give him that. Yeah. Consistently selfish. Consistently convinced that anything within reach belonged to him if he could justify it well enough. Tuesday morning, I got a call I wasn't expecting. Hi, is this Avery Collins? Yes. This is Daniel from Carter Jewelers. You purchased an item from us about 8 months ago. My stomach tightened slightly. The engagement ring? Yes, ma'am. A pause. Someone came in yesterday attempting to return it. I went still. Someone? Yes, a woman. She said she was your partner. Vanessa. Of course. What happened? I asked. We informed her that only the original purchaser can initiate a return or store credit. She became upset. Did she leave the ring? No, she took it with her. I closed my eyes briefly. Thank you for letting me know. Of course, we thought you should be aware. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, phone still in my hand. Then I exhaled slowly. Lila looked up from the couch. What now? He tried to sell the ring. Her eyes widened. You're kidding. No, through her. That's bold. That's illegal. Also that. I leaned back in my chair. Because now it wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just manipulation. It wasn't even just theft. It was escalation. And that changed things. That afternoon, I called my cousin Rebecca. She was a lawyer. The kind who didn't waste time on emotional framing. Just facts. What do you need? She asked after I explained everything. I want to know exactly where I stand. Legally? Yes. Okay, she said. First, the ring is yours. It's a conditional gift based on marriage. No marriage, no claim. He has to return it. Good. Second, unless you signed anything, you have zero legal obligation to pay for his exam or anything else. I didn't. Then you're fine. What about the messages? His mom is calling it financial abuse. Rebecca laughed. That's not what financial abuse is. I figured. You're allowed to stop giving money to someone, especially when they're using you. The word landed cleanly. Using, not misunderstanding. Not complicated. Using. What about the stuff he took? Include it in your claim and add the ring. If he tries to sell it, that strengthens your case. I nodded slowly. Okay. And Avery? Yeah? Stop engaging emotionally. Document. Let him talk himself into trouble. I smiled faintly. I already am. Wednesday, the email started. Not from Ethan. From a university address. His. You destroyed everything. Next email. I had to withdraw. Do you understand that? Another. You could fix this. You just won't. I forwarded every single one to Rebecca. Didn't respond. Didn't engage. Because now I understood something important. Desperation makes people careless. And careless people create evidence. Thursday afternoon, something new arrived. An envelope. No return address. Inside. A letter. Formal. Typed. Demanding. Payment for promised financial support. Compensation for emotional damages. Return of shared assets. I read it once. Then again. Something felt off. The wording. The formatting. The signature. I pulled out my phone and searched the law firm listed at the top. Nothing. No website. No record. No existence. I sent a photo to Rebecca. Her reply came back almost instantly. This is fake. Not even a good fake. I exhaled slowly. Because at that point, it wasn't even surprising anymore. It was just confirmation of how far he was willing to go. Of how little reality mattered to him when he felt like he was losing control. That night, around 8, there was a knock on Lila's door. Not gentle. Not patient. Loud. Insistent. Lila looked at me. You expecting anyone? No. The knocking came again. Harder this time. I walked quietly to the door and checked the peephole. And there he was. Ethan. Standing in the hallway. Jaw tight. Eyes sharp. A man who had finally run out of strategies. And decided to show up in person. I didn't open the door. Go away, I said through it. His voice came back immediately. We need to talk.
No, we don't.
Yes, we do. No, I repeated calmly, we don't. A pause. Then, you owe me. I closed my eyes for a second. Not in frustration. In clarity. Because there it was. Stripped of pretense. Stripped of charm. Stripped stripped of every soft layer he used to wrap around his intentions. "You're confusing me with someone who still cares what you think I owe you," I said. Silence. Then, "You're making a mistake." I almost smiled. "No," I said quietly. "I already corrected one." The hallway went still, and for the first time since everything started, he had nothing left to say. The knocking didn't come back. For a few seconds, I stood there anyway, hands still resting lightly against the door, listening for any movement on the other side. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the hallway lights and someone's television faintly leaking through the walls. "He gone?" Lila asked from behind me. I checked the peephole again. "Empty?" "Yeah," she exhaled. "Good, because I was about 2 seconds from calling the police." I stepped away from the door, my pulse steady, almost unnervingly so. "That might still happen," I said. And it did. Not that night, but the next one. Friday evening, exactly 1 week after I ended it, there was another knock. Different, heavier, measured. I didn't even need to look to know it wasn't Ethan this time. I checked anyway, and felt something inside me tighten. Not fear, just anticipation. His father, standing in the hallway like he owned the space. Jaw set, eyes hard. I opened the door halfway. "Yes?" "I know you're in there," he said, voice already raised. "We need to talk." "No," I said calmly. "We don't." His expression darkened. "You owe my son that money." There it was again. Oh, the word had started to sound almost meaningless, like something people said when they ran out of actual arguments. "I don't owe him anything," I replied. "You made a commitment." "I made an offer. Those are not the same thing." His voice rose. He planned his entire future around that. I held his gaze. That was his mistake. His face flushed red. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said evenly. "I think it's predictable." That did it. He stepped closer to the door. "You think you can just walk away from this? After everything he's done? After everything he's been working for?" I didn't move. "After everything I've done," I corrected. "Let's be accurate." For a moment, he just stared at me, and I saw it. The same thing I had seen in Ethan. Not confusion, not doubt, certainty. The kind that doesn't come from truth, but from repetition. From telling a story often enough that it becomes easier to believe than to question. "You're ruining his life," he said. I shook my head slightly. "No, he tried to build his life on something that wasn't his. And you let him." I trusted him. "That's your fault." I let that sit for a second. Then, "No," I said quietly. "That's his opportunity." Silence stretched between us. Then he scoffed. "This is unbelievable." "You're right," I said. "It is." He opened his mouth again, ready to continue, ready to escalate. And that's when I stepped back and pulled my phone out. "If you don't leave," I said calmly, "I'm calling the police." He blinked. "You wouldn't—" "I will." Another pause. A shift. Subtle, but real. Because people like him rely on pressure, on noise, on presence. And the moment you remove the audience, the moment you make it official, they lose ground. "You think this is over?" he asked. "Yes." "It's not." "For me, it is." He held my gaze a second longer, then turned. Walked down the hallway without another word. I closed the door, locked it. And this time when I stepped away, I felt something different. Not tension, not anticipation, finality. "Okay," Lila said from the couch. "That was intense." "Yeah." "You good?" I nodded. "Yeah." And I was. Not because it was easy, but because it was clear. The court date came faster than I expected. March 15th. 6 weeks of silence, documentation, and ignoring every attempt to pull me back into something I had already left. Ethan filed his claim. Not for the payment. His lawyer, an actual one this time apparently, must have told him that wasn't going anywhere. Instead, he claimed I had refused to return shared property. The list was almost impressive. My PlayStation, my headphones, my grandfather's watch, things he had taken, things he now claimed were his. I remember sitting at my kitchen table when I read it and thinking, of course this is the version of the story he chose. Because in his mind, ownership had never been about reality. It had always been about access. What he could reach, what he could justify, what he could take. Rebecca didn't seem surprised when I called her. "They always flip it," she said. "It's predictable." "What do we do?" "We respond with evidence." And we did. Photos, receipts, messages, a timeline so clean it almost felt surgical. And then we added the counterclaim, the stolen items, the ring, everything. "He opened the door," Rebecca said. "Now we walk through it." The courthouse was smaller than I expected. Plain, functional. Not the dramatic, echoing space people imagine when they think of justice. Just rows of chairs, fluorescent lighting, and a judge who looked like she had already heard too many versions of the same story. Ethan was there, with his mother, and a man in a suit who looked more confident than qualified. He saw me when I walked in. His expression shifted, something between anger and disbelief. Like part of him had still expected me to fold before it got this far. I didn't look away. I didn't react. I just took my seat next to Rebecca and waited. When the case was called, everything moved quickly. Too quickly for theatrics. Too quickly for manipulation to find space. Ethan's side went first. He spoke about shared life, mutual understanding, verbal agreements, words that sounded substantial until you asked for proof. Then it was our turn. Rebecca stood, calm, precise, unimpressed. She presented everything. Photos of the items in the apartment, receipts in my name, documentation of the messages, the attempt to sell the ring, the timeline. Clean, clear, undeniable. The judge didn't need long. 10 minutes maybe. Then she looked at Ethan. Do you have any documentation supporting your claim of ownership? He hesitated. No. She nodded. Then your claim is dismissed. His mother shifted beside him, visibly tense. The judge turned to me. Regarding the counterclaim, these items are clearly documented as belonging to the plaintiff. A pause. Then, you are ordered to return all listed property, including the ring, within 14 days. If not, you will be responsible for the assessed value. Silence. Final. Clean. Ethan looked like he'd been hit. Not dramatically. Just emptied. Outside the courtroom, his mother approached me. You happy now? She said. I met her gaze. I'm done now, I replied. That's not the same thing. It is for me. Ethan spoke then, for the first time since it ended. I hope you know, he said, voice low. No one's going to want someone like you. I almost smiled. Someone who doesn't fund exit strategies? He flinched, then looked away. And that was it. No grand speech. No last confrontation. Just the quiet collapse of something that had never really been built on truth in the first place. He returned everything on the 13th day. Not in person. Through someone else. A box. No note. Inside. The watch. The headphones. The PlayStation. And the ring. I held it for a moment longer than I expected. Not because it meant anything anymore, but because it used to. Then I put it back in the box. Closed the lid. And the next morning, I sold it. Not for what I paid, but enough. Enough to take something back. Enough to mark the end. 6 months later, people still had opinions. His family, his friends, even some of mine. Cold, harsh, unforgiving. Those were the words they used. I didn't argue, because they weren't entirely wrong. I had been cold. I had been precise. I had chosen timing over emotion. But here's the part they didn't understand. He had already made his move. I just made mine first. And sometimes that's the difference between being used and walking away with yourself intact.